Dovetail a little bit off of my colleague Ms. Capter's comments, and then I think one of the challenges we face is that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but we don't have the type of ability to know what real property the federal government owns, where it is, what it's costing the taxpayers in a centralized spot where a constituent could go and search areas of the country and know what the federal government owns. And I mentioned this to the GSA when they came before our committee. They're actually working on a database to, in response to some of our concerns, and that's just such a small sliver of our property. If we can't account for what we own, how could we ever properly manage our assets? And so I think that's an area where we're going to have to, and if you have proposals, we need to fix that problem to keep the federal government accountable to taxpayers. I want to go back to our conversation we're having about the national debt and long-term versus short-term. And, we're looking out not only, 5, 10 years, but 30, 40 years because of the demographics you raised as well, challenges that our country is going to be facing. And I guess, the House is going to consider budgets this week. They're going to consider the President's budget, I believe. They're going to consider the House budget. They're going to consider other options, different coalitions and caucuses. In terms of the President's budget, the House budget, I think that's going to go forward, balances within a 10-year window. When does the President's budget balance?
The President's budget balances in the out years, and as I said earlier, it's not because we, at this point in time, believe in the 10-year window. That's not the objective or goal.
I understand that, but does you say in the out years?
Yes. Yes.
Does the President's budget ever balance?
Yes, it does.
What year?
I would have to go, but as I said, it's not because we don't focus on it as a budget number. I'm happy to get the year.
We're focusing on longer term. I'm trying to get away from the short term. I think this Congress and this city spends too much time focused on 1, 2, 3, even the 10-year window. I mean, we're looking at where are we going with entitlement programs over the next decade, the next 2 decades, the next 3 decades. And so if the policies we're pursuing don't balance within 10 years, I'm assuming the President's budget doesn't balance within the next decade.
That's correct.
Okay. So it doesn't balance within the next decade. The House budget does. I guess we need some certainty. If we carry these policies out, does this budget ever balance? Because my fear is, since we've never run balanced budgets in this town, that culture has gotten to the point where the administration, and Republican administrations may do this as well, that we're not even submitting budgets that ever balance. And so I'd love for you to let us know when we could expect the President's proposal to balance. But there was another question I asked in our earlier dialogue regarding the Medicare warning. And my question was, regarding the federal statute that says if there is a Medicare funding warning made in a year, the President shall submit to Congress within the 15-day period beginning on the date of the budget submission to Congress, under subsection A for the succeeding year, proposed legislation to respond to such warning. Has a Medicare funding warning been issued, and has the President issued proposed legislation to respond to such warning in accordance with federal statutes?
I would leave the first question in detail to my colleagues that are the Medicare trustees, Secretary Sebelius and Secretary Liu, but yes, warning. And we consider our budget our proposal for how to handle the Medicare issues. That's what we believe is our proposal in terms of responding to the second part of your question.
Do you think that meets the statutory requirement? So then,
with regard, yes, we do, and we believe we follow the Bush administration's interpretation of that statutory requirement.
Which could also be incorrect. I think I think the idea is that the way the statute reads is that after a budget submission, there's a separate proposal related to the Medicare funding warning. And, we can argue, I guess, if it's within the budget or not, but it gets back to my fundamental point we're having in our last dialogue. My question really was, what are the long-term entitlement solutions, Medicare, Social Security solutions? And your response was, I think one of which we hear a lot from the administration, which is we've got to, find balance, and we've got to figure out what the slope we're on. And I guess, the House has put together a proposal that called premium support. It, really came out of the Clinton White House in some form or another. Alice Rivlin and others who were part of the administration you were in talked about the idea of Medicare Advantage for all. It's had bipartisan support. It may not be the answer. It's something the House is going to consider again. What is the approach that the administration, what are the specific proposals related to response to that Medicare funding warning? So if they're in the budget, what are the specific Medicare fixes that the administration has put forward in response to that statutory obligation?
So we have a number of proposals that add up to about $400 billion, and those proposals include things from making sure that we address what we believe are excessive and overpayments, that actually things that have even been written about as recently as yesterday, with regard to things that have been recommended by issues by the GAO and MedPAC as well. They address those kinds of issues. They try and put in structural reforms that create the incentives for types of delivery that will then result in further savings when people are incented to deliver impact, and so putting certain constraints on funding. So there are a number of different proposals that add up to $400 billion in our budget. And I guess I would also say I think it is about the choices that we make. With regard to the premium support issues and the proposal that is part of the Ryan budget, when one looks at that, one sees that for traditional Medicare, that you will increase premiums between $800 and $1,500. In the CBO report, it is pretty clear you're going to make a choice between increasing premiums or savings. You can't actually do both. And so I think the question then becomes what specifics. And so if the choices are about those kinds of premium increases, and there are numbers that say you could do this possibly without increasing premiums, but when you do that, you don't get the savings. And then the question is so what actually is the plan in terms of Medicare, specific Medicare proposals that will result in those kinds of savings?
Well, I guess I would just submit that the response of the administration, albeit maybe well-intentioned, it does not respond to the Medicare funding warning in a way that would actually fix the problem. And I know there's a lot of risk that goes in with the courage to address these issues, and I understand that. And people in both parties get beaten up in the House and Senate for taking that sort of courageous stance. Both parties have done it, and both parties don't do it. So it's not a partisan attack other than to say, in order to solve this problem, we're going to need strong leadership from the president to be able to respond to these warnings in a way that actually fixes the problem. And I understand you're saying overpayments, and everyone's going to agree on that, and certain things. But the warnings and the statement from the trustees that say lawmakers should address the financial challenges facing Social Security and Medicare as soon as possible. Taking action sooner than later will leave more options on the table and more time available to phase in changes so the public has adequate time to prepare. I just wish the administration would be willing to do that and provide the leadership. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back.
Thank you.